Before empires rose and fell, before the thunder of armies and the clash of steel, there was a story born from myth, raised by fire, and destined to echo through eternity. This story shaped the foundation of Western civilization. This story is Rome. Rome was not built in a day. It was forged in centuries, hammered by war, hardened by discipline, and lifted by ambition. But to understand the glory of Rome, we must return to its beginning, a beginning where myth and truth walk side by side. Legend tells us Rome was founded by two brothers, Romulus and Remus, sons of Mars known as the god of war, and a mortal princess, betrayed and abandoned as infants on the banks of the Tiber River. But fate intervened. A she-wolf, wild and fierce, discovered the crying twins, and instead of devouring them, she nursed them, protected them, and raised them. As they grew, so did their strength and their pride. They dreamed of building a city, but dreams turned to rivalry, and rivalry turned to blood. Romulus killed Remus, and from that tragedy, Rome was born. Though the myth lives on, archaeology tells another tale. In truth, the earliest Romans were farmers, traders, and shepherds. They settled on the Palatine Hill around the 8th century BCE. Simple people, but united by something powerful, a spirit of resilience. Even from its infancy, Rome was different. Rome was first ruled by kings, 7 of them. They built the city's first walls, its first temples, and shaped its earliest laws and rituals. Some ruled with wisdom, others with cruelty. But the last king, Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud, ruled with a tyrant's fist. His downfall would begin not with war, but with shame. His son, Sextus Tarquin, committed an unspeakable act against a noblewoman named Lucretia. Her grief, her pain, became Rome's rage. She took her own life, but her name became the battle cry of a revolution. Led by Lucius Junius Brutus, the Roman people rose against the monarchy. And in 509 BCE, they did the unthinkable. They abolished kingship. Rome would never again be ruled by one man. In its place, they built something radical, something new. The Roman Republic. The Roman Republic was a government unlike anything the ancient world had seen. It wasn't ruled by kings, but by law, by elected officials, by balance. 2 consuls shared power, elected annually, and watched over by a senate, a council of elder statesmen. But this republic wasn't for everyone. Only free Roman men had political rights, and even among them there was deep division. The patricians, aristocrats with land and lineage, the plebeians, common people, farmers, soldiers, workers. For decades, plebeians fought for rights. They went on strike, refused to fight, demanded change. And slowly, change came. They won the right to elect tribunes, officials who could veto laws that harmed the people. They carved their demands into stone, the 12 tables, the first written Roman laws. Rome was becoming stronger, not just by sword, but by structure. It was a republic born from fire and fed by ambition. Rome didn't wait to be attacked. It expanded, slowly, relentlessly. War was not just survival, it was identity. Rome fought neighboring tribes, the Etruscans, Volsci, Samnites. Every victory brought spoils, land, and pride. Roman legions, made of citizens, trained with discipline that bordered on obsession. They built roads as they marched, set up fortified camps each night. And after each conquest, Rome made a genius move. It offered partnership. Rome allowed conquered cities to keep their gods, language, and culture in return for loyalty. They had to pay taxes and send soldiers to serve Rome. It was a system that turned enemies into allies, and allies into Romans. But Rome's biggest challenge didn't come from the hills of Italy. It came from across the Mediterranean Sea, from a city called Carthage, ancient, wealthy, powerful. While Rome ruled on land, Carthage ruled the seas. The two titans could not coexist, and so began the Punic Wars. The greatest threat Rome ever faced came from a man named Hannibal Barca. He did the unthinkable, led his army and elephants across the Alps to attack Rome from the north. At the Battle of Cannae, Hannibal crushed the Roman army. Over 50,000 Roman soldiers died in a single day. Rome was shaken, but not broken. Years later, Rome struck back. General Scipio Africanus took the war to Carthage and defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama. Carthage was ruined. Rome stood alone, master of the West. But victory brought more than power. It brought corruption. Suddenly, gold poured into the Republic. So did slaves. So did greed. Senators grew richer than kings. The latifundia, massive estates, swallowed up small farms. Thousands of soldiers returned home to find their land stolen, their voices silenced. The poor flooded into the city. The divide between rich and poor became impossible to ignore. And though Rome had never been stronger on the outside, on the inside, she was starting to rot. The Republic stood, but the cracks were spreading, and soon they would shatter. Rome had conquered her enemies, but her greatest battle still lay ahead, not against foreign armies, but against herself. The Republic had conquered enemies, expanded borders, and grown rich beyond measure. But with every victory came a price. The values that once built Rome, including discipline, humility, and duty, were fading. In their place grew greed, ambition, and unrest. And soon from the chaos would rise a name that would change the course of history forever. That was Julius Caesar. Gaius Julius Caesar was born in 100 BCE into a patrician family with fading political influence. He was ambitious, brilliant, and charismatic. A man who knew that in Rome, power didn't come to those who waited. It came to those who seized it. He climbed the political ladder swiftly. He forged an alliance with two giants, Pompey the Great, who was the Rome's most celebrated general, and Crassus, the wealthiest man in the Republic. Together, they formed the first triumvirate, an unofficial alliance that ruled Rome from behind the curtain. But Caesar's ambition had no ceiling. In 58 BCE, Caesar took command of Rome's legions in Gaul, today's France and Belgium. What followed was a masterpiece of war. He conquered tribe after tribe. He crossed rivers, stormed fortresses, and broke alliances with cunning. His most formidable enemy was the Gallic leader Vercingetorix, who united the tribes against Rome. But Caesar surrounded and crushed him at the Siege of Alesia. By 50 BCE, Caesar had conquered all of Gaul. He returned not just with glory, but with a loyal army. The Senate grew uneasy, and Pompey, once his ally, turned rival. Caesar was ordered to disband his army, but Caesar was done obeying. In 49 BCE, Caesar stood at the banks of the Rubicon River, the boundary of lawful command. To cross it meant treason, but Caesar made his choice, and that was: the die is cast. He crossed the Rubicon, and Rome descended into civil war. Pompey fled. Caesar followed. In Greece, at the Battle of Pharsalus, Caesar's army triumphed. Pompey escaped to Egypt, only to be murdered by the Egyptians in hopes of pleasing Caesar. But Caesar was enraged, not grateful. In Egypt, he met Cleopatra, who was ambitious, brilliant, and captivating. Their alliance was personal and political. They had a son, named Caesarion. Back in Rome, Caesar returned a hero. The Senate named him dictator for life. He enacted sweeping reforms. Some of them are as: he canceled debts, he redistributed land, he reformed the calendar, he opened the Senate to men from across the empire. To the people, he was a visionary, but to the elite, he was a tyrant. On March 15th, 44 BCE, Caesar entered the Senate unarmed. He was surrounded by men he called friends. Suddenly, knives. He was stabbed 23 times. Among the conspirators was Brutus. Then fall, Caesar. He collapsed, lifeless, at the foot of Pompey's statue. The Republic had struck down its most powerful leader, but instead of salvation, it triggered the final collapse. Chaos returned to Rome. Caesar's death left a power vacuum. His supporters rose in fury. Riots swept the streets. Two men would emerge from the ashes: Mark Antony, who was Caesar's trusted general, and Octavian, who was the Caesar's adopted heir. They formed an uneasy alliance to defeat the conspirators. At Philippi, Brutus and Cassius were defeated and died by suicide, but the alliance didn't last. Antony fell in love with Cleopatra, who was the queen of Egypt. Octavian called it treason. In 31 BCE, at the Battle of Actium, Octavian's navy crushed Antony and Cleopatra's fleet. They fled, and soon after, they took their own lives. Rome was no longer a republic. In 27 BCE, Octavian returned to Rome as a hero. The Senate gave him a new name, Augustus, the revered one. Though he kept the illusion of a republic, all power belonged to him. He was Rome's first emperor. The Roman Republic had lasted nearly 500 years. It had outlasted kings, dictators, and foreign wars, but it could not survive ambition from within. And so, the sun set on the Republic. But in its place rose something far greater and far more dangerous: the Roman Empire. The Republic was dead. In its place stood a new order, not built on shared power, but on the will of one man. That man was Octavian, but the world would remember him by another name: Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. He did not seize power with a crown. He earned it with peace, and in doing so, he ushered in the most magnificent era of Roman history, known as the Roman Peace. It was 27 BCE. Octavian returned to Rome victorious. He had avenged Caesar, defeated Mark Antony, and restored order. The Senate, weary of civil war, offered him supreme power, but Augustus was shrewd. He refused the title of king. Instead, he became first citizen and accepted a new name: Augustus, the Exalted One. He kept the Senate, the laws, the illusion of the Republic, but make no mistake, he ruled everything. He reformed the army, created a loyal civil service, and introduced laws to strengthen Roman family values. The empire had a leader, but it also had peace. For over 200 years, Rome knew stability. It was a golden age, unmatched in Roman memory, due to following reasons. Roads stretched from Britain to Syria. Aqueducts carried fresh water into cities. Amphitheaters echoed with cheers. And art, literature, and architecture flourished. Augustus transformed Rome from a city of brick into a city of marble. He supported poets like Virgil, who wrote the Aeneid, Rome's epic origin story. He brought temples, baths, and laws to distant provinces, and the legions guarded the frontiers like iron walls. Merchants crossed safe roads. Sailors crossed Roman seas. Rome became more than a city. It became a civilization. After Augustus died in 14 CE, Rome entered a new chapter. His successors came from his family, the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Some tried to walk in his footsteps. Tiberius, a capable general, but was cold and distant. Claudius mocked for his limp and stammer, but was a brilliant administrator. Nero, a name that would echo with madness. Nero built palaces while the empire burned. After a great fire swept through Rome in 64 CE, many believed he started it himself. He persecuted Christians, executed senators, and played music while blood ran through the streets. Eventually, even the Senate turned against him. In 68 CE, as rebellion surged, Nero took his own life. With Nero's death, Rome fell into chaos. In 69 CE, 4 men claimed the throne, one after another: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian. The empire teetered on the edge of civil war, but Vespasian, a general from humble origins, emerged victorious. He restored order, rebuilt the treasury, and began the construction of Rome's greatest arena, known as the Colosseum. Built with the spoils of war, including the sack of Jerusalem, the Colosseum became the symbol of Roman might and spectacle. Under Vespasian and his son Titus, Rome expanded further. They completed the conquest of Judea and paraded the treasures of the Jewish temple through the streets of Rome. Later emperors brought more glory. Trajan expanded Rome to its greatest size, from Britain to Mesopotamia. Hadrian built the famous wall in northern Britain, marking the limits of empire. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king who ruled during plague and war. These were the 5 good emperors, just, wise, and beloved. Rome was at its peak, unmatched in military strength, cultural power, and geographic reach. But beneath the surface, old cracks were returning: greed, corruption, and civil unrest. The empire had grown too large, too complex, too rich. And as emperors came and went, few could match the wisdom of Augustus. Rome had reached the height of its glory, but history teaches us that empires do not stay still. They rise, they shine, and then they fall. In the next chapter, we witness the unraveling, the slow descent of an empire that had once ruled the world. Every empire has its twilight, and even Rome, mighty Rome, could not escape the weight of time. Its foundations began to tremble, not in a single day, but across centuries. The signs were there, such as weakened leadership, endless wars, plagues, poverty, and the slow erosion of unity. The empire that once stretched from Britain to Egypt now faced enemies not just at its gates, but within them. Rome's golden age began to fade in the 2nd century CE. After the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE, his son Commodus took the throne. Where the father was thoughtful, the son was reckless. Commodus renamed Rome after himself, fought as a gladiator, and declared himself a god. The Senate hated him. The people feared him. In 192 CE, he was strangled in his bath by a wrestler, paid by his own advisors. The empire descended into instability. Generals fought for power. Emperors were chosen by the army and killed just as quickly. The 3rd century became known as the crisis of the 3rd century. In just 50 years, Rome saw over 25 emperors. Most of them were assassinated. At the same time, enemies pressed in from all sides. The Sassanid Empire attacked from the East Germanic tribes, stormed the Rhine and Danube frontiers. The Goths, Franks, Vandals, and Alemanni ravaged Roman lands. The legions were stretched thin. And worse, plague swept across the empire, killing millions. Cities shrank. Trade slowed. Rome, once full of life, was dimming. In 284 CE, a new emperor took power. His name was Diocletian. He was a soldier, tough, organized, and ruthless. Diocletian knew the empire was too large for one man, so he split it in two, Eastern Rome and Western Rome. 2 emperors ruled, 2 capitals stood. He restructured the economy, set price controls, and rebuilt the army. But he also unleashed terror on the Christians, ordering mass persecution. Still, under his rule, the bleeding stopped. For a time, in 305 CE, Diocletian did something no emperor had done before. He retired. He faded into history, but the cracks remained. Then came Constantine the Great. In 312 CE, he marched on Rome to claim the throne. Before battle, he had a vision, a cross in the sky, and the words, "In this sign, conquer." He ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol on their shields. They won. Constantine became the first Christian emperor of Rome. He ended Christian persecution, legalized the faith, and eventually converted himself. He moved the capital from Rome to a new city in the east, Constantinople, the city of Constantine. It was a powerful symbol. The center of Roman power was no longer Rome. As the east grew stronger, the west continued to weaken. Corruption festered. Taxes soared. The army now relied heavily on foreign mercenaries, many with no true loyalty to Rome. In 410 CE, disaster struck. The Visigoths, led by Alaric, marched into Rome and sacked the Eternal City. For the first time in 800 years, Rome had fallen to a foreign army. People cried in the streets. Saint Jerome, a Christian scholar, wrote in grief, "If Rome can perish, what can be safe?" More invasions followed. The Vandals plundered Rome in 455 CE. The Huns, under Attila, terrorized the Italian countryside. The Ostrogoths waited in the shadows. In 476 CE, the final blow came. A Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposed the last Roman emperor in the west, a boy named Romulus Augustulus. The Roman Empire in the west was no more. But not all was lost. In the east, Constantinople thrived. The Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, would survive for another 1,000 years. Its scholars preserved Roman law. Its builders raised domes like Hagia Sophia. Its emperors fought off Persians, Arabs, Crusaders, and Turks. But it was no longer Rome as it had been. The soul of the Republic, the fire of the early empire, had faded. And in 1453, when Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks, the last flame of Rome was extinguished. Rome began as a myth, rose as a republic, ruled the world as an empire, and then vanished into memory. But Rome was never just a city. It was a symbol of ambition, of glory, of the dangers of unchecked power, and the fragile hope of freedom. Its roads may have crumbled, its legions may have faded, but Rome, in name, in law, in spirit, endures, because empires fall, but legacies live forever.